Hello, I'm Alma Schneider. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and the proud mother of 4 children, one of whom has Prader-Willi syndrome.
And I am Iris Miller. I'm a certified rehabilitation counselor and the proud mother of 2 children, one of whom has quadriplegic cerebral palsy and is nonverbal.
In this podcast, we discuss the uncensored truth about raising children with disabilities.
Prepare to laugh, cry, and hopefully learn something new.
This is 2 Moms, No Fluff.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 2 Moms, No Fluff, the podcast in which we discuss the uncensored truth about raising kids with disabilities. Thank you for our listeners who are joining us today for the first time, and for everybody else who's been with us for a while now. Thank you for still tuning in and listening to our episodes. We appreciate you very much. I am Iris Miller, and with me today is my partner for the podcast and our business, and my colleague and my friend, Alma Schneider. Hi, Alma.
Hello, happy to be here as always.
Hi, Alma. Alma, do you want to introduce our topic of the day?
I would love to introduce our topic today. Today, we're going to be talking about invisible disabilities and how society responds to our children who have invisible disabilities. And this is a really great episode for allies in the community, people who want to learn more about people with disabilities, because it's really how society reacts to our children with the invisible disabilities. So we're hoping that whoever's listening will share this with their schools, their colleagues, their friends, their family members, to really get a sense of what it's like on the other end when there is an invisible disability in the mix. So I thought I'd start off, if that's okay with you, Iris. Sure. We deal a lot with issues that have to do with invisible disabilities, and unfortunately, it's not always good. And people say it can be a blessing and a curse to not have a disability that is obvious. The upside, I guess, would be that people are, when they first meet someone with an invisible disability, they treat them like everyone else. The downside is that they treat them like everybody else, and they don't seem to understand or think about the fact that even though this person seems typical cognitively, emotionally, that they might have some challenges that or just be different from the general population. So I'll give some examples to start off. When my son went to the movies with my friend's son, my son has a tendency to stare. And I think I've mentioned this in the past in previous episodes, but he kind of processes information a little slower than other people. So he will look and stare at someone, whereas someone else has the social cue to know that you're not, that it can make other people uncomfortable if they look a little too long. He doesn't seem to have that like everyone else. And so he will, if he thinks that he recognizes someone or he's interested in someone, he'll look at them for a little bit longer than a typical person would. And let me tell you that most people in society don't like that. They don't enjoy being stared at. They get uncomfortable. They wonder why the person is doing that. They can get somebody brought up a good line that, when I told them this story, that hurt people. So we had an experience recently where I took my son to Chicago to visit my older son who's in college. And we were at a World Market, which is an international store. And all of a sudden I turn to the left and I see that my son is having like a stare down with someone who works at the store. And I didn't know what was going on. They were both staring at each other from across, from a few feet away from each other. And pretty soon I picked up that, okay, something is not okay here. And I said, "Is everything okay? What's going on?" And at first I thought maybe my son was taking something. There was candy or something and he was taking candy, but he wasn't. And they were just staring at each other. And the woman who worked at the store, she had an apron on, so I knew she was working there. She looked at him a little bit longer, even when I said that, is everything okay? And she didn't say anything and she walked away. And I asked my son, I said, what happened? Why was she staring at you? And why were you staring at her? He said, I don't know. He said, I don't know. So I actually went over to the woman when my son was in another area. And I said, was everything okay over there? I said, was my son staring at you? And she said, yes. And she seemed kind of annoyed. And I said, I just want you to know he has autism, which is my easy go-to disability so people, understand. And she goes, oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm sorry. So it was very clear that she was very put off by the fact that my son was staring at her, and he meant nothing by it. So I'm going to talk, a little bit more about this incident, but I want to start off with that because it's a very recent situation that it just happened a couple of months ago, and it was very off-putting. And I'll stop there. I'll let you. I'll pass the torch over to you.
Oh my gosh, Alma, I think I spoke about it a little bit in another episode, but the experience of the other person, if you feel, what is maybe the question that pops into their head is, what is wrong with that individual? Why is he staring at me? Answer the question to yourself. There is probably something that is not quite typical about that individual. Do not take it personally. Allow other people to behave in unexpected ways. If you do that, they would also hopefully allow you to behave in unexpected ways when you have a bad day or when things don't go quite as planned in a day. I think that our society doesn't give us a lot of wiggle room in terms of behavior, expectations, the rules of conduct in different, venues and different activities. I wish that we as people had a little bit more tolerance to things that are not quite as we expect. The lives of so many people with disabilities, whether they're physical, cognitive, emotional, just would be so much easier. It would be easier to be a part of community, a part of society for individuals that don't do it quite as we all expect, And I think that people with invisible disabilities always kind of carry the burden of proof with them wherever they go and whatever they do. And if, they come into a point of friction with the person who's providing the service, who is responsible for an activity, or just random neighbors, they take the burden of proof of why didn't they do things as anticipated or as expected. And it's so hard to kind of justify yourself or your child nonstop in the face of society. This is so traumatizing as a parent to have to always explain, always apologize, always be alert so you don't have to kind of do damage correcting later on. And in many ways, when I hear some of the stories of other parents who have children with disabilities that are invisible, I think to myself, well, we are lucky because we wander around with like this huge kind of sign screaming, we are different, because everything about how my daughter kind of travels the world or just interacts with even the physical environment is so very different that there's no doubt whatsoever that this is a person with a disability. And I think just as a tiny example, I know that when a person has an invisible disability like epilepsy, and they have a service dog that is there to alert before they have a seizure, then people would be much more kind of interrogating them if they enter a place with a service dog than they would when they see my daughter with a power wheelchair and a communication device and a service dog. It's almost self-explanatory why she has a service dog.
Right.
So I can just appreciate how the day-to-day of people, it's like a person who kind of hops out of the car without a wheelchair and yet is parking in a wheelchair accessible parking spot, and people are like, why does that person have a disability tag, etc. We all know how it is. Back to you, Alma.
Yeah, no, it's true. And you used a term, we're always on the alert. And it's true. I'm always on high alert when I go out with him, because I am constantly saying, don't look at that person. Don't stare too long. And he's just interested. That's how he takes in information, So getting back to that story about World Market, we left World Market, and this really had an impact on my parenting, and it really shined a light on, is it shined or shone? Shined a light? I think shine.
You're asking the wrong person. I'm writing with my English all the podcast.
I was hyper aware in the moment of how I reacted to Lincoln during this incident, because I got very upset with him. I said, Lincoln, you can't stare at people. You can't stare at them. And I realized in that moment, but that's how my son takes in information. It's like telling somebody, don't breathe the way you're breathing, or, don't chew the way you're chewing. And it's something that comes so naturally to him, and it's a part of who he is. It's simply how he takes in information. He has to look a little bit longer than other people do. And I felt really badly about that I was telling him, don't, like, as though it was his fault that this woman was clearly, getting annoyed at him, getting angry. And in that moment, when I saw that at World Market, it was really fear-based why I was getting upset with Lincoln. I said, you can't stare at people that long. It makes them uncomfortable. It makes them, feel like you're looking at them for some negative reason. And I then caught myself and I said, it's not your fault. It's not your fault that you're staring too long, but it's simply that people aren't accepting of that. And I know that it's just simply the way that you you're interested in them, and that's why you're looking. But you need to know that people may get upset when you look for too long. So it was a real interesting moment for me, because I'm constantly telling my son, don't, if I see someone who's like, in a wheelchair, or if I see someone who is a little person, I'm forgetting the term for it, but I think it's little person, I know that he is going to stare at them longer, and I think he also feels like an affinity towards them, like, oh, they have a disability also. But it can put people off. It can make people feel uncomfortable. So even before we approach the person, I say, Lincoln, don't stare.
Sorry.
Bless you. And
sorry about that.
So it's important, I think, to, as you said, the world needs to change, not my son. This is how he takes in information. He's not doing anything wrong. It's how society is looking at him, taking in that information, that is the issue. So, the theme here is, please be kind. Please take a pause if you feel that someone is being insulting or trying to offend you by looking at you too long or saying certain things to you. Take a tiny pause and think, maybe this person, is not typical, and I need to give that pause to find out a little bit more about what's going on here.
Yeah, I think like if that person, instead of kind of confronting Lincoln with a stare, would just say, hi, I am Sarah, or whatever. Can I help you with something? That would have been so easy to transfer the conversation or the interaction to something that is kind and something that is useful and helpful, because as she would probably converse with him, either she would understand that he wasn't kind of having any bad intentions by
Mhm.
staring, and also might be able to discover more about him. Now,
Mhm.
given that when we kind of leave the house with the wheelchair and the service dog, the communication device, and my daughter, we are the object of stares nonstop.
Mhm.
When when we were once I said it in another episode, once with our cousin out and about, and she noticed that all the people are staring at her. She was, I think, 7 at the time, and she said, "Hey people, why are you all looking at us?" And it was a little bit newer to her than it was for the rest of us, but yes,
Yeah.
when you walk in a crowded place, everybody's looking at us.
Yeah.
The thing that I like to do if we're standing somewhere and I see a person staring at us for a long time, I would say, "Hi, this is Karen. She's 12 years old," or whatever,
Yeah.
and start introducing her. And I know that sometimes the object of their focus is not the child, it's the wheelchair, the dog, the communication device, but I am trying to put the focus on the human factor, and that is my daughter, and I try to have them focus on the person. There is a person here. It's not just a pile of equipment. So
Yeah.
I found it to be really, really helpful. And people, sometimes the nice things that I get is reactions from children or from adults with developmental disabilities that screen their thoughts a little bit less. And it is very interesting to see what is of interest. So children many times would then start asking, "What is that car that she's driving?" They
Yeah.
don't know what the wheelchair is, and they really want to understand why she has a car, which is very cool to be in the supermarket on a car
Yeah.
that drives her. They want
Yeah.
one too, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes, like, I remember there was an interaction with someone with I don't think it was Down syndrome, but he basically said, "Oh, there's someone in his high school that also looks like her." There
Mhm.
was another student with cerebral palsy, and he couldn't tell us that the diagnosis, but
Right.
the presentation was similar. And
Mhm.
he looked at Karen for so long because he was checking similarities. It was very interesting. So I think if we could all be a little bit more patient and more kind, and try to understand that the odds that someone really is either staring at you or touching things in a store when they're not maybe allowed to touch,
Mhm.
it's almost like how do you say, to take a deep breath and go towards the person and see the person first, and then
Mhm.
analyze the behavior.
Yeah.
Because if you start interacting and if you err on being kind, I almost can guarantee that you'll be pleasantly surprised seeing the person behind the behavior, behind the unexpected, maybe vocalization, behind the unexpected pattern of movement.
Yes.
You,
You're
Anna.
absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And I think that it's very hard for most people because we have to sum up a person very quickly. We live again in a very fear-based society, and we're all afraid of, why is that person looking at me, as opposed to thinking, oh, I wonder why that person's looking at me. Maybe there's something behind it. And we all jump to the fear. But as a parent, I have a lot of fear about my son's invisible disability because of community and their responses to him. So I am often in the situation where I have to tell him to curb his behaviors. And it doesn't feel good to have to do that. And I really hope that allies are listening to this episode, for their about their so that they can talk about some of these things with their children, which leads me to my next example, which is my son went to a movie with my friend's teenage kids. They were watching a movie, and before the movie started, my son kept turning around in his seat and staring at some high school kids that were a few rows behind them, and he was really staring. And the reason he was staring was because all he wants to do is make connections with people. It's the most important thing to him. Whenever we go out, he's trying to see, those are people that I know from school. When I went to the public school, I know this person from our synagogue. I know this, like, he loves connection. So he was staring at this group of kids behind him, uh, because he was trying to see, like, do I know them? I think I know them from before, but he stared, longer than a typical person would. And they started throwing popcorn at my son and the other teens that were in the room. And it was a beautiful thing because I found out later that he went up to the kids and out of earshot of my son, and he said, what are you doing? And they said, that kid keeps staring at me. He's like trying to cause trouble. And he, very discreetly said, he's got a disability. Can you just cut him some slack? And that is a mature teenager and a kind teenager he was discreet about it so it wouldn't embarrass my son. And he just put it to rest. But I think about my son in other situations where there isn't that kind person who's his advocate. And it would be, I wish we lived in a perfect world where all kids would have that wherewithal and that knowledge from their parents, from school, that some people are different. And some people, it's not always about somebody trying to cause trouble. Sometimes, again, 1 in 6 kids has a disability. And to talk to your kids and your family members and your friends about the fact that 1 in 6 kids has a disability, and they're not all visible disabilities. So to take what you see with a grain of salt, what they say with a grain of salt, think about, wow, that sounds rude that kid said that. Maybe he has, something going on at home. Maybe he has, or she has, maybe they're not neurotypical and they say things that don't have a filter. Just take a pause before getting upset and feeling like this person is out to get you. It's very hard to do, especially in our society, but we need to do it because we're all here. Many of us are different, and we need to keep the peace.
Yeah. Alma, you know what? First of all, it's a beautiful story, and kudos to the other team that was able to explain and kind of mitigate the situation.
Mm-hmm.
But it just goes to show how easy something so innocent, like a behavior of a just curious child, teen, but in this case with a disability, can cause a chain reaction of bullying for nothing, for absolutely nothing. And it angers me so much because I think the main mistake in our society is how we segregate children with disabilities in the education system. Because if all of the children with disabilities were a part of normal day-to-day life in kindergarten, in the classroom, in middle school and in high school, and we would focus less on cognition and more about heart, and we would teach our typical children how to not only coexist with people who cannot see, who cannot hear, whose cognition works in a different way, whose emotional reaction can sometimes be totally unexpected. We would all gain so much of it as a society. No wonder that people with disabilities these days, when they apply for jobs and come to an interview, they are most likely to be rejected because the people that interview them don't know how to be their colleagues. They don't know how to work in the same environment with someone who might be the best computer programmer, but is not able to watch a screen like they watch a screen. They don't get it. And we need to improve so much on that. And as long as we really take those kids with disabilities into a segregated classroom, into a segregated school altogether, and we don't integrate them in the same after-school activities and programs as well, we have a problem that we won't be able to solve in in future time as those children age, and it's a shame.
And it needs to start, as you said, very early on, so people are exposed to people. They just need that visibility, and get familiar with people who are different from them, because it can really change how society views difference. And it's not a negative thing. It's simply different. And I've spoken a lot about, just the staring, but, you can have an invisible disability and say provocative things, like my son, who has gotten into quite a bit of trouble at school for saying provocative things simply to get attention. Whereas a typical kid, might be aware that, oh, that's not appropriate, that's going to get me in trouble. It's kind of like living with blinders on for a lot of kids who don't have a filter because they are not neurotypical, and that can cause a reaction, as you're saying, to cause people to bully him. So if people were more aware and more open to differences and exposed to them from a younger age, these things might not be happening later on when they get to middle school, which is when a lot of the proverbial crap hits the fan. And honestly, a lot of kids end up going to out of district placements once they hit middle school, because that's when the real bullying often starts.
And
And
that's like so annoying because that should be the age in which you expect more of
yeah,
children. They have
they're
their
more.
prefrontal
Mhm,
cortex developing. They should be more tolerate and more helpful to
accepting.
people who are differently abled. It's
Mm,
mind-boggling. Sorry,
it
go.
is.
I had to
No, it's
jump in
very
there.
unfortunate. You're absolutely right. But that's when a lot of kids end up leaving, leaving the integrated public school system. So
Yeah.
there's a lot for people to do, but again, this episode, we're really hoping that the allies are going to tune into this and share the information and make everyone a little bit more accepting of people who behave differently than neurotypical children.
Alma, before we finish, I just want to share one story, and that's
Mhm,
the kind of last day that Karen, my daughter, still had an invisible disability. And the day that we moved from Canada to California, was a Friday, and Saturday morning was the morning we went to Able Closet, a charity that donates wheelchair and other durable medical equipment to kids who need it.
mhm,
I hope that we do an episode about them one day. But
mhm,
getting the first wheelchair to a child is, I can't even understate like how emotionally charged the experience
mhm.
is. This is a permanent thing. It's that's the point of no return. And
Yeah.
before we got our first wheelchair, we kind of continued carrying Karen around in different types of strollers, depending on the situation. And obviously, the night before we got the wheelchair, we were eating in a restaurant. And you enter the restaurant, and there is always like the hostess. Usually, it's a 20-something-year-old lady who has no clue about life. And
Mhm,
for policies, you leave the strollers outside, and we tell her, we cannot get our daughter out of the stroller. She's quadriplegic. She cannot sit independently. We need the stroller. And she's like, I'm sorry, this is our restaurant's policy. You cannot go in with the stroller. And we're like, so look at it as a wheelchair. She
mhm,
cannot be seated independently. And one person is not enough because of the support needs to kind of balance her in sitting
mhm,
anymore. And it was just such a struggle. And all the waiters and waitresses that kind of crossed our path and went by our table, everybody made sure to let us know what an annoyance we are to their kind of existence in the space with our stroller protruding into the hallway, etc. The following day, we got the wheelchair. My daughter was so delighted. She was so happy on her new stroller thingy. And
mhm,
you could see right away that she was just as happy as could be. I was kind of like trying to, embrace her happiness. And we went to a restaurant right after getting the wheelchair.
mhm,
What a difference. I am telling you, I was kind of bracing myself to another kind of struggle. But the moment they saw the wheelchair, suddenly they understood what it is all about. And
mhm,
then we were happily escorted to the wheelchair accessible table. Everybody was extremely kind. And suddenly the odd looks that my daughter used to get because of the abnormal movements and all that, that was all replaced with like kindness and compassion. And I thought to myself, wow, what a difference just this device can make in attitudes and approaches from other people. It was
mhm,
just mind-boggling. I'll never forget how in a flip of a button,
mhm,
people were suddenly more tolerating and more accepting and kind.
mhm,
So I'm sharing all of that because we have a lot to do. We have a lot of things that we need to improve on. And having a child with a disability and living life that is a very kind of different, let's say, in many ways, is hard enough for parents. Please try and be kind, be accepting, understand that when you offer programs or services, you should let people just come as they are, and everybody would be happier.
It's absolutely true. And I just want to add an emphasis on the fact that for people of color, the invisible disability issue is way more dangerous. And, we know what happens. We hear it all the time in the media about how people with autism, who are people of color, African American, really experience the brunt of fear and dangerous situations when there is a disability, an invisible disability. People feel that they're not complying with the police or with someone else, and it can result in death. I mean, it can result in somebody being attacked, held down, restrained, and even shot, as we've seen. So it can be really a tragic ending. So please, these are really important things to be paying attention to. There are many invisible disabilities that can cause people to behave erratically and behave in ways that are not socially acceptable. And we have to have our eyes open and know that we do not all act the same. People have a different way of expressing themselves, and to pause before taking some kind of an action. Oh, so depressing, but at least we're trying to share the information, right, Iris, to make the world a little bit better.
The ending note is very, very depressing because this is a really cruel reality, and I'm really happy that you brought it up, because this is the one place in which we really need to transform and change how police is treating people of color in general, but specifically people with disabilities, because we all know there is not enough training, there isn't enough knowledge, there isn't enough tolerance, and it really, people pay with blood for those mistakes that are done by untrained individuals. They are obviously scared as well, but there's some situations in which you need to stop and reassess.
Yes.
Thank you again for sharing all of that information. Do you have anything you wanted to add before we end for today?
No, except that you look lovely today, Iris.
Thank you. I'll pay you for the compliment later.
No need, but it's always a pleasure having these conversations with you. And I guess we'll see everyone next time.
Yeah, thank you, Alma. Thank you, everybody. If you have any questions, comments, or would like to rate us, please do it, because this helps us reach other people that might benefit and learn from our episodes. Thank you very much, and have a lovely day.
For more information, please go to www.twomomsnofluff.com. Thank you.
If you like this podcast, please subscribe and give it a 5-star rating so more people can hear it. Thank you.